Karen Todd, and I live in Spittalfield, where I was born and brought up and where my father's family have lived for generations. In 2017 I took a career break and decided to transform the village shop, which had been lying empty, into a cafe. I'm a keen walker and cyclist, and I hope to turn it into a small hub for local walkers, cyclists and our small community. The rural area is ideal for walkers, and research shows that around 1880s until the First World War there was a local cycling club in Capeth. But a lot of their activities took part in Spittalfield on a track at the back of the village. I am sure that even way back then cyclists, as they do today, would drop in for a roll or a cake to replenish their energy. The cafe is part of a very long tradition providing food and refreshments within the village. 3 years after Spittalfield was founded in 1766, the landowner, John Mackenzie of Delvin, decided a baker's house and oven should be established in the village, reasoning that the district had plenty of broom and winds, though scarce other firing. And when poor people can have bread baked for a penny per peck, it is far easier and better than consuming their own fire. Unclear whether any bakehouse actually was built at the time, but there is a record of an oven being constructed in 1793. From the 1830s until the 1860s, Spittalfield's baker was William Johnston, recorded in as providing bread to Delvin House in 1833. His son Robert had succeeded to the business by 1871. Remembered as a kindly man who would present children visiting his shop with a parley, a parliament cake, a kind of flat ginger cake. The business was acquired in 1876 by George Sturton, succeeded by his son James. The Sturton family ran the baker's business until 1914, when it was acquired by Henry Paul, who was the last person to use it as a bakehouse. Polly's rolls, as his triangular morning rolls were known to all, were a favourite breakfast eating throughout the district. In 1928, Mrs. Paul opened a tea room with access by a staircase from the shop to the upstairs room. Therefore, the Walkin Cafe has revived a tradition of providing hospitality within the premises. I have had many a descendant of the Sturton and Paul family who have shared their memories and also brought me pictures, some of which are here just now, of their family and how the cafe once looked. My own granny had her wedding reception in the tea room upstairs. A source of income for the various proprietors of the bakery and tea rooms was catering for various big social gatherings and celebrations. The shop was not the only place providing catering, and it is interesting to read accounts of some of the occasions supplied by local businesses. In January 1838, Mrs. Chalmers, landlady of the Spittalfield Inn, served dinner to the members of the Delvin and Dunkeld curling clubs in the recently completed village hall. The Chalmers appear to have been the principal purveyors at such events, although in the early 1830s there are references to Johnston the baker supplying food to a ball held in Spittalfield. When Mr. Cuthbert took over the inn from Chalmers, he gave it the name the Delvin Arms Inn. He and Mrs. Cuthbert catered for social and club events right into the 1880s, when presumably the inn closed its doors. Another big event was on the 8th of December 1835, in honour of Delvin Laird Sir John Muir Mackenzie. A large glittering dinner took place on the village green, which is just opposite the cafe. A wooden pavilion, compared at the time to a fairy temple in some eastern tale, was erected in the centre of the green. Two parallel ranges of pillars helped support the roof, giving the interior the appearance of a Gothic church. The building was decorated with cloth drapings as well as evergreens, holly and flowers, plus the crests of Delvin family. The interior was lit by between 200 and 300 wax candles, in addition to 15 chandeliers suspended from the ceiling. Projecting from the main building was a highly decorated arbour containing a sideboard for the service of the principal guests, and also an orchestra pit. Nearly 400 guests were seated, with the principal guests at the table on an elevated stage. Other guests, including local tenants and those of adjacent districts and inhabitants of Blairgowrie and Cooperangus, were seated at 5 long tables extending from end to end. The meal got underway in the early evening when the village innkeeper, Mr. Chalmers, served up a dinner which would have done no discredit to our principal city inns. Presumably on that bleak December evening, hot meals had to be borne from the inn at the end of the East Row by an army of hired waiters. I would love to know how the food was kept hot or even warm for serving all those guests. George Sturton, the village baker and grocer, served tea on the green to over 150 people who attended the Spittalfield open-air social meeting in August 1885. This gathering came to be known as the Old Wives' Picnic. When Henry Paul acquired the business in 1914, he and Mrs. Paul continued the tradition of catering for local functions. Between the wars, throughout the Second World War and later, Henry or Mrs. Paul catered for most social, sporting and celebratory events in the local area. They undertook the catering for the opening of the newly formed Glendelvin Cricket Club in 1922, similarly the opening of the Bowling Club's new pavilion on their move to the present green in 1923, and also Capers Tennis Club Leap Year Dance in 1940, to name but a few. Having served the community for over 45 years, Henry Paul retired in 1960. For the ensuing 50+ years until its closure in 2015, the shop continued as a general store and post office under a succession of proprietors. I have thoroughly enjoyed having the cafe and have met so many people with many a story of having lived in Spittalfield or have had ancestors who have, and now they remember the village and cafe as a bakehouse or grocery store and post office, and they all have their own story to tell. Cyclists come from all over Tayside and further and travel many miles on their bikes to visit the cafe. It is really amusing to think that back when the village postman retired in 1928, a presentation took place in Paul's tea rooms. During tea, guests gave reminiscences of local postmen. The furthest back anyone could go was to John Stratton over 50 years earlier. In these days, the head post office was in Dunkeld, and John had to walk there daily for his letters before he began his round. His daily walk was about 24 miles. One red letter day, a bicycle was put on the road. John made it himself, and Robertson the blacksmith had put iron hoops on for the wheels. The village turned out in force to see him go off for his first day to Dunkeld. The bicycle carried him until he retired, when it then became the property of his sons, and many Spitley lads learned to cycle in it, until it fell to bits one day on the Plant Brae. Jim Black's book, Heart of the Stormont, is published by Abertay Historical Society. and should be a great source of interest to anyone interested in the history of Spittalfield, Capeth and the countryside around.